Hello friends, and welcome to the Animal Nerd Podcast, where we share incredible true stories from around the world. I'm your host and Animal Nerd-in-Chief, and I am so excited that you've found my podcast. So today, for our first ever episode, how exciting, I wanted to share an absolutely incredible story that I'd never heard of until recently, and I was honestly really surprised that the story isn't better known. So hopefully by sharing it here today, I can help to spread this inspirational tale to more people and raise a bit of awareness too. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you the story of Thandi, who made history when she became the first rhino in the world to not only survive being poached, but went on to fully recover. Please be aware this episode is going to contain descriptions of cruelty to animals, injury and death. I'll have a full list of content warnings in the show notes if you'd like more information. This story begins in the beautiful Kariga Game Reserve, located in South Africa's Eastern Cape. Kariga is a privately owned reserve which spans over 11,500 hectares of wilderness and is home to an array of different species, including the Big Five. As well as being a haven for wildlife, it's also a popular destination for safari holidays, and honestly, it looks like a lovely place to spend your vacation. It's a sad reality that anywhere that's home to species such as rhinos and elephants is also a target for poaching, and unfortunately Kariga is no different. In order to try and protect the beautiful creatures who call this place their home, Kariga have extensive security and teams of anti-poaching patrols who are regularly out keeping an eye on the animal residents, and it was one of these security patrols who made a tragic discovery on the early morning of the 2nd of March 2012. An adult bull rhino lay dead, shot in his sleep, his face disfigured by poachers who had hacked away at his skull to remove his horn. It's a heartbreaking sight, but not the first time a rhino had been killed in Kariga. Since their first poaching incident in 2010, there have been multiple rhinos whose lives and horns have been claimed by poachers, despite the best efforts of Kariga's rangers and anti-poaching patrols. In fact, after the first rhino in Kariga was killed, the rest of them began to change their behaviours. You see, although rhinos are a relatively social species and enjoy each other's company, they're also quite solitary for the most part. However, after Kariga's first poaching event, the rhinos became much more close-knit. They began to spend more and more time together, travelling together throughout the day and sleeping together in the same area overnight. They seemed to realise that there was strength in numbers, and that by banding together they might be able to keep themselves safe. A group of rhinos is, rather charmingly, known as a crash, and this particular crash consisted of 5 rhinos. The one who was found dead was known as Bull 84. Knowing that there would have been other rhinos about when the poachers attacked, the patrol went searching, and sure enough, they found 2 more rhinos a short distance away. Like Bull 84, both had been shot and maimed, their horns hacked away. It's believed that Bull 84 was killed in his sleep, and the commotion woke up the other 2, who tried unsuccessfully to flee. I mentioned that there were 5 rhino in the crash, but so far I've only told you about 3. The final 2 were a mother and calf, with the creative names of Mum and Baby. For whatever reason, perhaps some kind of maternal instinct, Mum had split off from the rest of the group that afternoon and had chosen not to rejoin the others in their regular sleeping spot. Because of this, both she and her calf were unharmed, a small slither of light in an otherwise incredibly dark situation. But the other 2 rhinos were less fortunate. One was a young male, who would later be named Themba, and an adult female who would become known as Thandi, the main focus of this story. Despite their terrible injuries though, both Themba and Thandi were still alive when they were found. This really surprised me because I'd always assumed that poachers would shoot and kill their targets with guns, but it turns out that these days, especially in South Africa, which is home to over 70% of the world's white rhinos, and therefore where most rhino poaching happens, that's not the case. Instead, poachers will use tranquilizer darts, the same kind that are used by wildlife vets and conservationists, and there are a couple of different reasons for this. The first is that dart guns are silent, which means it's much easier for poachers to remain undetected. Rifles are obviously very loud, and will therefore immediately give away your presence and your position to any rangers in the area. The second reason is that it's not actually that easy to kill large animals with bullets. Generally speaking, you're only going to get an animal down if you hit the brain or a vital organ. Of course, that's not to say that a shot animal won't go on to die a slow, painful death from an infection or other related injuries, but in order to escape detection, poachers need to make a quick kill, so they can take the body parts they want and then get out of there as quickly as possible. And with a tranquilizer dart, it doesn't matter what part of the animal you hit. The anaesthetic will go in regardless, and the animal will soon be down. You might think that using tranquilizers instead of bullets would mean that more animals survive poaching, but that's sadly not really the case. You see, although they use the same anaesthetics that wildlife vets use, the difference is that obviously vets are trained professionals that know what they're doing and don't want to harm the animal. So they're very careful with the amount of anaesthetic in each dart, ensuring that they contain enough to knock the animal out for whatever procedure needs doing, but not so much that it harms them, and they then give them a reversal drug as soon as possible to help them come round. Poachers, of course, don't do this. Sometimes their darts will contain too much anaesthetic, which results in the animal's death. That was sadly the case with Bull 84. He suffered an overdose, which caused his respiratory system to shut down. And of course, the injury he suffered when his horn was removed would only have worsened things. The other male Themba suffered the opposite problem. It's believed the dart used on him didn't have quite enough anaesthetic in it to render him fully unconscious. He would have been too affected by it to escape, but he would have been conscious enough throughout the attack to feel the pain of his horn being hacked off, which is just such a horrific thought. When Themba was found, he was coming to, but he was in a bad way. Not only had he suffered a horrific wound, but he had also landed in an awkward position, with his right hind leg beneath him. This may not sound like much of a problem, but Rhino is so heavy that if they lie down for too long, they can crush parts of their body under their own weight, and this is what happened to poor Themba's leg. The blood flow had been completely cut off, and because he'd been left like that all night, the muscles in his leg had already begun to die. When he was given the antidote to the tranquilizer to help him get up, he tried to stand on all four legs, but he just couldn't weight bear on his right hind leg at all. Thandi, however, was said to be in the worst condition. She was found still unconscious, lying in a pool of her own blood, foaming at the nostrils. She'd lost up to 30 litres of blood, and was missing almost the whole front of her face. It had been hacked into with an axe or a machete, the poachers being sure to remove every inch of horn, including the stub beneath her skin. Her skull had been splintered by the attack, fragments of it piercing her flesh. Dr. William Folds is a wildlife vet, and was one of the first on the scene. He would later say that when he first found Thandi, she was in such a bad state that he didn't think she'd survive, but he was going to do everything in his power to help her. You see, Dr. Folds is actually known as the Rhino Man. Trying to save poaching survivors is kind of his thing. Since 2011, the year before this particular event, he'd become obsessed with trying to save rhinos from the poaching epidemic that was going on all around him, and it all started with a rhino named Gazer. Gazer, like Thandi and Themba, was a rhino who survived the initial attack of poachers. Tragically, though, despite Dr. Fowd's best efforts, Gazer was simply too severely injured to be saved, and it reached a point where the only thing he could do for Gazer was to end his suffering. Most of us will know how hard it is to come to the decision to have an animal we love put to sleep, but I can't imagine how much harder it must be when you're the one who has to actively end their life. Understandably, this tragedy had a massive impact on Dr. Folds. He vowed that he would do everything in his power to prevent other rhinos from suffering as Gazer had. He would not allow Gazer's death to be in vain. The Kariga Foundation's website quotes him as follows: "People have never seen a rhino lying there, trying to fight for its life. Nothing can prepare you for what you feel or see. The experience I went through with Gazer, it changed me forever." And Dr. Folds wasn't the only person involved in saving Thandi and Themba, whose personal connection to a poached rhino would motivate them to dedicate their whole life to trying to save these beautiful creatures. Sean Patrick Giles is a game ranger at Kariga. He started working there in 2008, when he was in his early 20s. And he had a particular bond with a female rhino named Brokenhorn. Sean would take tourists out on their safaris, and whenever Brokenhorn heard his voice as he told visitors about her, she would appear as if on cue, wandering out of the bush, much to their delight. And when Brokenhorn gave birth, Sean was the first person she chose to share her baby with. The two shared a unique bond, something that's incredibly rare with wild animals. And then, in January 2011, Brokenhorn became the second rhino in Kariga to be killed by poachers. Sean was heartbroken. Of course he was. But instead of shutting down the way so many people do when confronted by grief, he instead used the tragedy of Brokenhorn's death to spur him on. He felt a sense of responsibility to the rhinos at Kariga, an overwhelming desire to protect them from the same fate that befell Brokenhorn, so he joined Kariga's anti-poaching unit. Sean became a man obsessed. He would spend up to 23 hours a day working to keep the rhinos of Kariga safe, and his entire life became dedicated to his work, to the point where he had all but disappeared from the lives of his friends and family. His dedication to the cause was absolutely incredible, but of course that kind of work-life balance is also incredibly unhealthy and unsustainable. And that's without taking into consideration the fact that working as an anti-poaching ranger is incredibly dangerous. Poachers are more than willing to kill humans who get in their way, and Sean knew that every day he was going out to work could be his last. Sean's desperation to protect rhinos was all-consuming, and he could only keep up that intense lifestyle for so long before something had to give. After only 6 months of being on the anti-poaching unit full-time, he hit breaking point. He realised the negative effect it was having on him, and ultimately he decided to return to his previous job as a game ranger. It was only a few months after this that Thandi, Themba and Bull 84 were attacked. Sean was left with the agonising what if. What if he hadn't quit? Would he have been able to catch these poachers and prevent this tragedy? There's no way of knowing, but I really do hope that Sean has been able to make peace with his decision. What happened to those rhinos was not his fault, but despite that he still felt a strong responsibility towards Thandi and Themba, and he was heavily involved in caring for and watching over the two rhinos as they recovered. For the first few days after the attack, the survivors would be watched over by rangers, including Sean, around the clock, and Dr. Folds was on constant standby in case either rhino took a turn for the worst. As well as cleaning Thandi and Themba's wounds, the pair were also given injections of antibiotics, painkillers and more to help them recover. They were even given vitamin injections to make sure that their immune systems were functioning as well as possible. In fact, over the first few weeks, they would each receive between 30 and 40 injections every week just to keep them healthy and help them heal. The level of dedication from everyone involved is just incredible. On top of that, the rhinos had to be darted every single week to allow the wounds to be cleaned and to remove the flies and maggots which not only ravaged the wound, but also ate away at the healthy flesh. Despite all of this work, all of the hours dedicated by so many people to rescuing these rhinos, the team were actually able to keep Thandi and Themba living in the wild for the majority of their treatment, which is just incredible, and a real testament to the level of care everyone at Kariga had for these creatures. Despite this though, some people actually criticised them for trying to save these poaching victims, feeling they should have been euthanised as soon as they were found to save them suffering. But the team at Kariga thought Thandi and Themba deserved a chance at life and a chance at healing. They could see that Thandi in particular was determined to survive. You could see it in her eyes. She wasn't going to give up without a fight, and neither were those who loved her. Sadly though, Themba wasn't so lucky. The team did their absolute best for him, but he was never able to regain the use of his damaged leg. The muscles were simply damaged beyond repair, and he couldn't so much as move it, much less weight bear on it, and he could only keep going like that for so long. Themba fought on bravely for 24 days, but on the 26th of March, he was found lying in his favourite wallowing hole. The poachers had finally won. He was dead. Themba had drowned in less than a foot of water. It seems almost impossible that a creature as large and imposing as a rhino could die in such a tragic and unceremonious way. And Themba could have held his head above the water if he'd wanted to, but he simply couldn't make himself. He'd fought so hard for so long, and in the end, it seemed he really did just give up. He was exhausted. Apparently, this kind of thing isn't actually that uncommon for rhinos. It's not unheard of for an unwell rhino to go off on their own, find a peaceful spot, and choose to lie there until they simply pass away. Even so, Themba's death was a real blow to the team who had put so much work into trying to save him. An autopsy was held to see if there was anything that could have been done differently, if there was any possible way that Themba's life could have been saved. This is something Dr. Folds does with all poaching survivors who end up succumbing to their injuries, in the hopes that the knowledge he gains from them can then be used to help other rhinos survive. In an article for the charity Helping Rhinos, he's quoted as saying, "I made a promise to a dead rhino. His name was Themba, that I would make every single day, all 24 days of suffering count, that I would do everything in my ability to turn suffering into a pain-free future for other rhino." Themba's autopsy revealed that there was nothing that could have been done. His right hind leg had been irreversibly damaged on the night he was poached, and there was simply no way he could have been saved. His leg had already died long before he had, and it was always going to be just a matter of time. The location that Themba died was his favourite place in the world. Before he was poached, he used to spend hours wallowing in the mud there. Unfortunately for the tourists staying at Kariga, it was a spot which was in perfect view of the restaurant deck, meaning that the sight of his obvious bliss brought joy to an untold number of people over the years. After his passing, it was decided that he should be buried there, so he can spend forever in the place he loved most, free from pain at last. Themba's battle may have been over, but Thandi was still alive, now the only survivor of that horrific poaching attack, and the team around her were determined that she would survive. They hadn't been able to save Themba, but maybe they could still find a way to save Thandi. It wasn't easy. Thandi had to go through multiple treatments. She had multiple vets working on her, and at one point even a human plastic surgeon, and went through skin grafts using groundbreaking techniques to help her heal. And it worked! It took well over a year of hard work from countless people, but eventually Thandi's wound healed. In 2013, a new bull rhino was introduced to Thandi's crash, as the deaths of Themba and Bull 84 had left them with no breeding males, which is obviously an issue for an endangered species who you want to breed as much as possible. And there was a brief hiccup when Thandi's wound was reopened after an encounter with him, but it once again healed up, and the vets did extra work to thicken the skin where her horn should have been to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. Because Thandi's horn growth plate was destroyed in the attack, her horn will never grow back, and although the wound has healed, her face is severely scarred from the injuries. But now, those scars serve as a testament to her strength and determination to live. Thandi was the first rhino in the world to make a full recovery after being poached, and her story went on to inspire others around the world to get involved in rhino conservation. Dr. Folds, who was such a core part of Thandi's survival, has since travelled to China and Vietnam to try and stem the misinformation that leads to demand for rhino horn, in the hopes that doing so will make the horns less valuable and thus less sought after by poachers. And he's also gone on to help multiple other rhinos who have survived being poached. And that's not the only incredible thing to come out of Thandi's story. Simon Jones was a senior manager at American Express, a company he'd worked at for over 20 years, but he'd always had a passion for conservation, and at the time of Thandi's attack, he'd taken a sabbatical from his career and was working in the world of big cat conservation. He'd also previously been to Kariga 2 years prior to the attack, spending 6 weeks there supporting their conservation work, so when he heard about what had happened there, he knew he had to do something. And do something he did. In March 2012, Simon founded an NGO called Saving Rhinos, and since then the organisation has managed to raise over £3 million to go towards rhino conservation. Through this, they've been able to offer protection to over 1,000 rhinos, as well as managing to secure over 250,000 hectares of wild space as a safe haven for rhinos. Through Saving Rhinos, you can actually adopt Thandi and her family, and I'll be sure to include the links to that in the show notes in case Thandi's story has inspired you to donate to their very worthy cause. Another incredible non-profit who saved a key role in helping Thandi is Saving the Survivors, who are dedicated to helping poaching survivors as well as other wildlife in need of rescue. They've worked to save several rhinos over the years, as well as lions, elephants and more across 7 different countries. Again, I'm going to leave a link to their site if you want to donate. It really does seem like an incredible cause. So remember how at the beginning of the episode I said the rhinos of Kariga had changed their natural behaviours in response to poaching in the park? Well, after Thandi, Themba and Bull 84 were attacked, the survivors once again changed their behaviour. You see, typically white rhino will sleep out in the open, and that was the case when they were poached. However, afterwards, Thandi and the rest of her crash started spending their nights hidden away in bush thickets, in an attempt to stay hidden from danger. They've also gone back to being more solitary, perhaps thinking that a single rhino is less conspicuous to would-be hunters than an entire group of them are. Although that being said, Thandi does still meet up with Mum from time to time. And even after Thandi was physically healed, it was clear that there were deep psychological wounds that may never fully heal. Prior to the attack, Thandi was known to have a quiet and calm nature. But now she, and all the rhino at Kariga, have become more fearful of humans. Rangers can no longer approach on foot like they used to, and the rhinos will run away from any human they see or hear. Thandi spends quite a lot of time now hiding in the bush, sometimes not being seen by park rangers for days at a time. Despite this though, Thandi does seem to be thriving. In December 2013 she received her final facial procedure, and as always they took blood for testing. This was just a routine thing to see how her health was doing, and they weren't expecting anything out of the ordinary on this final test. But the test did show something when they came back. Thandi was pregnant. She and the new male may not have gotten off to the best start, but clearly they'd become more fond of each other as time had gone on. Some people had believed that the combination of psychological damage and the lack of horn meant Thandi would never be able to be a mother, but she seemed determined to prove her naysayers wrong once again. And on the 13th of January 2015, Thandi gave birth to a female calf, who was named Thembi, which means hope in isiXhosa. And Thandi wasn't the only one of the poached rhinos who became a parent. Remember Bull 84, the rhino who didn't even survive the night? Well, it turns out that at the time of his death, Mum, the other adult female in his crash, was pregnant by him and went on to give birth to a son, meaning that hopefully Bull 84 will live on in his bloodline for generations to come. And the baby train does not stop there. In January 2017, Thandi would give birth again, this time to a male calf who was named Colin, after Colin Rushmere, the founder of Kariga who had passed away only days before Colin the rhino's birth. In 2019, a group of notorious poachers in the area were convicted and sent to prison. Though we can't be 100% sure, it's believed that these most likely were the same poachers who had also attacked Thandi in her crash all those years before. And not long after this, in April 2019, Thandi gave birth to her third calf. He was another bull, and inspired by the poacher sentencing, was named Mthetho, which means justice in isiXhosa. And then in late 2020, Thandi became a grandmother when her daughter Thembi gave birth for the first time. 2020 was a hard time for Kariga because, like so many ecotourism locations, they fund their conservation and anti-poaching work through holidaymakers, which obviously wasn't something that was happening in 2020. To help raise money, a prize draw was organised to choose the name of Thembi's son, and the winning name was Mkosi, which means warrior in isiXhosa. And then, in 2021, Thandi welcomed her 4th child into the world. This was another son, named Sia after Sia Kolisi, captain of the World Cup winning South African rugby team. And this birth came as a total surprise to the Rangers, who had no idea Thandi was even pregnant until they saw her with baby Sia. And we are still not done with the babies! In April 2023, Thandi gave birth yet again, once again to a son, who this time was named Zolani, after one of the reserve's much-loved field guides who had sadly passed away in 2022. And only a few days after Zolani's birth, Thandi's daughter Thembi gave birth to her second calf. In all my research, I wasn't actually able to find the name or sex of this newest addition to the family, so I'm not actually sure if it's been named or if its sex is known. But regardless, this brings the total number of Thandi's descendants to 7. That's 7 members of a highly endangered species who wouldn't be here at all if Thandi hadn't been saved. It goes to show not only how damaging poaching is to populations, but also how when it comes to endangered species, every single individual really does count. If Thandi had been put to sleep when she was first found the way some people wanted, then Thembi, Colin, Mthetho, Mkosi, Sia, Zolani, and the newest baby would never have been born. And who knows how many more rhinos are going to come into this world over the years through Thandi, Thembi, and all of their other offspring. It's a real conservation success story. But you might be thinking, damn, that's a lot of bull calves. Thembi is the only daughter Thandi's ever had. What's up with that? Well, it's theorised that female rhinos are more likely to give birth to males if they feel that their current territory is getting too densely populated, because less females means less babies being born. So in an attempt to encourage more female births, Helping Rhinos partnered with Kariga in 2022 to create a vastly expanded territory, and then relocated Colin's crash there. Despite all this positive progress though, rhino poaching continues to be a problem across Africa. In 2012, the year that Thandi was attacked, nearly 700 rhinos were killed by poachers. Kariga, like many reserves, dehorn their rhinos to try and reduce the risk of them being attacked. But this isn't enough on its own, as up to 10% of a rhino's horn is actually under their skin in the part known as the stub. and poachers will still kill rhinos even for that relatively small bit. But there is hope. Rhino poaching numbers peaked in 2015 with a horrific body count of over 1,300. But according to Save the Rhino, the number has fallen every year since. In 2022, 448 rhinos were killed in South Africa. That number is still far too high. It's still more than one a day. But it's also a lot lower than it was, and it's proof that when enough people get together to solve a problem, they can make progress. And Thandi's story is a beacon of hope, proof that with enough help and support, individuals and species can survive and thrive no matter what is thrown at them. In fact, one very exciting update is that Thandi's species, the southern white rhino, has actually seen an increase in numbers for the first time in over a decade, going from 15,942 in 2021 to now over 16,600. It may not be a massive increase, but it's an increase nonetheless, and Thandi and her family have been part of that. Rhino, like all endangered animals, and all animals in general for that matter, still need our help. And like I said, I'll have links in the show notes if you feel inspired to donate. It really does make a difference. When enough people get together for a cause, change does happen. So often stories about climate change focus on the horrors, and I'm not trying to downplay those. Climate change is absolutely something we as a species need to make one of our top priorities. But I think it's also important to focus on positive stories, to celebrate the progress we're making and the people who are making it happen. So that's the story of Thandi the rhino. I really, really hope you enjoyed it. This is one of those where I found out about it and I just had to tell as many people as possible. I think it's absolutely incredible, and I hope you found it as beautiful and inspiring as I did, even if it was quite dark in parts. If you did enjoy this episode of the Animal Nerd podcast, please do share it with your friends and give us a review or rating in your podcast player, and subscribe to us so you never miss a new episode. They come out every Tuesday, hopefully. I have a lot of ideas for future content, and I promise they won't all be as heavy going as this one was. And if you yourself happen to know of any stories that would suit this podcast, or if you just want to reach out for any other reason, you can contact me at animalnerdpodcast@gmail.com. Or you can reach out through any of our social medias, which I'll have linked in the show notes. Oh, and before I go, I'm going to have all of my sources linked down in the show notes, but I did just want to give a quick shout out to some of my main sources for this episode. Those would include the extensive coverage of Thandi and her family on helpingrhinos.org, as well as Lauren Daisy Flynn's incredible 4-part series on the Kariga Game Reserve website. I'd highly recommend checking them both out if you want an even more in-depth at Thandi's stories. They're great, and this episode would be nowhere near as good without them. Again, thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support us, then follow the podcast, rate us, find us on social media, tell your friends, anything. It would all be greatly, greatly appreciated. And until next time, stay wild, friends.